Hello, myself Purnima R, and today I have choose the core subject biology, and I'll be discussing about the class 12th of biology, that is the chapter 2 sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So as I have mentioned, we'll be talking about sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So when it comes to the reproduction part, each and every organism on the earth is very important to reproduce in order to maintain the generation. So flowering plants is also known as angiosperms. So flowering plants is also known as angiosperms. So which is the reproductive organ in the flower? If we talk about that, then the reproductive organ is flower without any doubt. So what is the reproductive organ? That is flower. So when we talk about flower, this flower has some basic part or the important structures or the main functionality in it. So we'll be discussing about this in future. First is sepals, petals, pollen, and stalk. So these help in the reproduction part depending upon their functionality or their duties, we can say. Okay. So the most important question or the most important or repeated question I can say, that is the structure of flower. So without any doubt you have to refer that complete structure. So firstly let's discuss about each part first, and then we'll combine everything, so we'll make a complete part. So coming to the reproduction part in flowers, so basically they have male and female reproductive organs. We all know that. Just a minute. Okay, so male reproductive and female reproductive. So when we combine both male reproductive and female reproductive organ, that is known as bisexual flowers. Those flowers are known as bisexual flowers. So we have seen these examples in our day-to-day life. For example, hibiscus. Hibiscus is one of the basic example for a bisexual flowers. So example, China rose, I can say. China rose and China rose pea. Example, China rose, pea, and hibiscus. So these are the basic examples for the bisexual flowers. So we have discussed that combination of male organs or female reproductive organs is known as bisexual. Then is there a flower which has like different male separate and female separate? Yes, it has. So when the male flower is different and female, like one flower has its male organs and another flower will be having its female organs, so there are two separate flowers. So what those flowers are called as? So they are called as unisexual. So the definition comes as either these two, either the flower should have male reproductive organ or female reproductive organ. So they are known as unisexual flowers. So what are the examples for unisexual flowers then? So the example for unisexual flowers, the most familiar example that I can give is sunflower. So sunflower has two different types, that is a male flower and a female flower. So I just said about two different reproductive like flowers, that is unisexual and bisexual. Then how we can say that this flower as that male reproductive organ or this flower as that female reproductive organ? So female reproductive organ consists of a carpel, that is like this. So in carpel, the upper and lower. So, in female reproductive organ, the upper part is known as stigma. Okay, so the upper part is known as stigma, and the lower part is known as ovary. The middle part, that is known as style. And the beautiful thing is, even in male reproductive organ and female reproductive organ, we have a common thing, that is style. That is this supporting structure between those two, like important like what we say, important parts of the that reproductive organ. So when it comes to, this is the female. Okay, so when it comes to this female part, the below this part of ovary consists of ovules. So what they do consist of ovules. So what this ovules is made up of? So ovules is made up of eggs, similarly to the human reproductive structure. So when this egg combine with the pollen or the male reproductive organ, they do form a zygote. So we'll be discussing this later. So first we have to know what are these things, or what's the important structures of a female reproductive structure. So as I said, stigma, style, ovary. So we are done with female reproductive structure. What does the male reproductive structure consist of? So male reproductive structure always comes above the flower, or above the basic structure of the flower. Okay, but female reproductive system comes below the flower, like it's the protective layer which is covered by sepals and petals. So I'll be discussing this also later. So coming to the male, now we are learning about male reproductive structure. So imagine this is the sepals. Okay, so here will be the carpel, always it will be covered with the sepals and petals. Okay, so about this there will be a filament like structure. This entire thing is known as filament. So this part is the male reproductive structure, or the reproductive structure. So we can say that even we can say like male reproductive structures which releases pollens, that is the male gamete. In female, as we discussed in the female reproductive structure, I mentioned ovule. So ovule is the female gamete, and coming to the male reproduction structure, the female gamete is pollen, that is the small dusty particle. So I'll be discussing this in the pollen part. So for now, female and male reproductive organs differentiation is all that we need. And then okay, so this is the filament part. So in the filament, the above structure, this is known as anther. So this anther has pollen grains. So what does pollen grains have, or how does the pollen grains work? So pollen grains will be a round like structure which is covered with a dusty or a powder like form. So basically it will be yellow in color, and it has a dusty powdery form of layer above that pollen grain, dusty powder form. So we discussed both about male and female reproductive structure. So let's just recall that male reproductive structure. What is the zygote? Pollen is the zygote. Okay, gamete. Pollen is the male gamete. Fine. In female reproductive structure, ovule is the gamete. So okay, we got to know that this is male reproductive structure and female reproductive structure, and the differentiate between them. So how does the reproduction takes place? So coming to this point, Okay, so in reproduction there are two types of reproduction, that is self pollination and cross pollination. So what is self pollination? When a plant happens, like reproduction happens in the same plant, like pollen releases, comes and sit in the same carpel, so that is known as self pollination or self reproduction. In cross, I'll write that. So there will be a single flower, your pollen drops out and comes to the same carpel. So this is referred as self-pollination. Coming to the cross-pollination, here the one flower will be there and another flower will be there, like different, a male flower and a female flower. So when male flower releases the pollens, it comes and sits to the different flower of different plant, not a same plant. So this is referred as cross pollination. So we are done with the cross pollination and self pollination. So covering the next topic, that is let's discuss about each part of the flower. Okay, so I'll teach you the easiest and simplest way to write a flower, the outline of a flower. So first let's write a parallel lines, that is stalk. Stalk is just a supporting structure. What is this? Okay, so let's do one thing. I'll just write the outline of the flower and we'll explain each. Okay, then comes the sepal, that is like this. Okay, and then comes the petals. So this is sepals, petals. And coming to the filament part, I have discussed this earlier also. So just write a line like this. Anther, this is the anther and this is the style. So the female reproductive organ, I'm writing it now. So the middle part is called ovary and the outer part is called carpel. So this is the like a diagram or a structure of a flower. Okay, so they'll be asking this is the very important question. Write a diagram or a structure of a typical flower, that is in typical angiosperm, that is typical reproductive structure in an angiosperm, that is the flower. So here the easiest or the most commonly written flower is the hibiscus. So we are writing the hibiscus and I have discussed this. So we'll be discussing about what is anther, style, petals, sepals, and what are the functionalities of these plants now. So let's talk about anther. Anther will be like this. So what's the functionality of the anther? So we talked about the releasing of pollen. So how it releases? So basically we have a style at the bottom of the anther like this. So what happens? The ovary, so what happens? The pollen grains are released from the style part, like it will be like this, like moving. I'll just mention it will be like this, like this. So everything will be moving in the circular way. So pollen grains comes from the bottom, when it touches with the any like another pollen or this thing, it goes down like that. So style releases the pollen grains, and what happens? Pollen grains come and sit in the above part of the anther like this. So what is pollen grains? Is just a sticky, pollen grains is a sticky yellow form of grains or the female zygotes. So it will be like this. So anther helps in releasing of the pollen grains to the atmosphere. Fine, it get released. So that's the main functionality of the anther. So coming to the next part, that is style. Style helps in two different functionalities. One is for reproduction part, one is for pollen grains release. So how it helps in reproduction part? So imagine there is a male zygote coming. That is, imagine this is the ovary. So another pollen grain come and sit on the anther. So this style sucks in that anther, like it grabs the pollen grain from the anther and this touches to the ovule. So when these both, like pollen grain, this is pollen grain, meets with the ovule. So this is ovule, this is pollen grain. So when these two meets, there's a form of zygote. So this style helps in both, like supporting structure between the main part and the base part, and even the suction of the pollen grains from the anther and the releasing of pollen grains from the base part, that is carpel. Okay, so coming to the next part, that is we are talking about is petals. So let's talk about petals. So petals basically, what's the functionality is, first functionality is to attract the insects. Why to attract the insects? So just imagine there's a bird, there's a honeybee, we can talk. So honeybee, when it sees a colorful petals, it comes and sit on that flowers. Okay, so without any intention or without any idea, it goes and sit with another flower. So what happens when it, just imagine there's an insect, so the legs, imagine this as the legs for now, and when it comes and sit with anther, the pollen grains present on the anther get stuck to the legs of the insect, that because it's the sticky part, right? So it gets stuck in between the legs or the ends of the insect. So when it goes and sit with another flower, what happened, the stuck or the which is getting stuck into the legs of the insects get placed on different plants of the different anther. Okay, so when that get placed, it sucks and the ovulation takes place. So sepals is mostly important to mostly important because to attract insects, and this first part is attract insects, and the another part is like when we talk about supporting structure or the balance of holding it, it helps in like a holding or a support for the plant. Okay, so there are two main points why petals are important. Okay, even the sepals are like same kind. Sepals help petals help in holding the filament and the anther, but sepals help in holding both, like the filament of the anther and even the carpel part, because sepals, the carpel is placed on the sepals, like the sepals will be like this, so carpel will be placed on the like sepals, so it has to hold both sepals, carpel and the main filament and the anther. So sepal is the most important part, and sepal are almost green in color. Sepals are mostly green in color. Fine. Last topic is how, what happens if when the zygote is formed. I said about zygote also, like when male gamete meets with female gamete, the zygote is formed. So this is zygote. let's imagine this as a zygote. So what happens when the zygote is formed? So like I'll explain with a nice structure. Fine. So I have drawn the zygote thing also. So these are sepals, and the top three, these are petals. Okay. Okay. Now let's draw a filament. Anther and a carpel. Okay, so this is a flower. So anther, when pollen sets, it comes to the ovule and there is a formation of zygote. There is a formation of zygote like this in this part. Okay, so when that is formed, what happens, it turns, like the pollen grains when combined with the ovule, it turns into seed. Okay, so when that seed is formed, it becomes bigger and bigger, and what happens, these petals and sepals started falling off. Everything falls off. These pollen stalk will be there, except that everything falls off. So after it falls off, it will be somewhere like this. So this is stalk. Sepals will be there, except sepals and stalk, everything gets falled off. So there's a seed, and that seed turns into seed. So after seed, it turns into fruit. So this is the procedure of from starting, how the reproduction takes place and how it is like produced. Okay, so the from the flower, it's a beautiful thing where it turns out to be a fruit that is eatable, or that seed can grow into a new plant depending upon each particular flower. Okay, so this is the most important topics that I have covered today, that is the sexual reproduction in flowering plants, and we are done. Thank you.